Infamously hated, God, Jesus, is so bright. Infamously hated metal albums part 9. Cold Lake is the full studio album by the very influential Celtic Frost and was absolutely shredded upon its release. But does it deserve the bad rep? Celtic Frost, while not still active, is a band that's very heavily remembered for all their massive influences on extreme metal and all of its many subgenres. Black, death and thrash bands all over the world frequently cite Celtic Frost as one of their biggest influences, and I couldn't imagine many modern bands existing without these guys. Formed back in 1984, Celtic Frost would help pioneer the very early sound of black metal, which back in the day had much more of a sound closer to traditional heavy metal as opposed to what we know the genre today. Over the years, Celtic Frost would release Morbid Tales to Megatherion and Into the Pandemonium. 3 releases that upped the intensity of heavy music of the times and combined it with their own avant-garde flair. However, following a North American tour, financial troubles and growing tensions between the bands, the band members and the record label would lead to a brief breakup in 1987. And I call it brief because simply 6 months later, Celtic Frost are back with an almost entirely new lineup and, say it with me, a drastic change in sound. Cold Lake would be released in 1988 and was marketed to capitalise on the explosion of success that was glam metal, with even the appearance of the band resembling the massive hairstyle looks of that genre. And as you can fucking imagine, this wasn't received very well, with the album getting absolutely eviscerated by critics and the band dubbed as sellouts by fans. Mind you, this is an opinion that is slowly changing with time, with more positive reviews rearing their head nowadays. Despite the really glammy look, however, this album had a sound that was much more closer to traditional heavy metal than it was glam, and honestly, this was its biggest flaw. Because let's move on to my opinion of this record. Does it deserve the bad rep? When I consider the quality and my own enjoyment of this record, you know what, actually, I think it does. Even if I dismiss Celtic Frost's other amazing albums, Cold Lake as a merit of its own worth just kinda sucks in my opinion, and I find this record really fucking boring. The DNA of the old school first wave black metal is in here, and the DNA of glam metal and heavy metal is also in here, but the album doesn't really commit to either of these sounds. Leaving this as a record that doesn't have the fun bounciness of glam, but also doesn't have the edge of the original records. Each song kinda sits at the same-ish tempo, and none of the songs really stick out to me. They just kinda happen, leaving little impression after I'm finished with them. But even when you take into account the rest of the discography, this album just sticks out like a sore thumb, and even the band admits it. Tom Warrior has gone on record saying that Cold Lake is possibly the worst album ever created in heavy music, and an utter piece of shit. Whilst I don't fully agree with his own take here, I will say that when it comes to these metal misfires, it's much more interesting to me to cover a bad album as opposed to a boring one. Because that's what Cold Lake kinda comes down to, just boredom really. What album should I cover next?